Okay, so my roommate gets back in 30 minutes, so I'm just gonna have to make this really, really quick. Also, I have red hair. Now I get to mess with red bangs all the time. It's very different. Hello world, welcome back to Lit History. I hope you guys are excited to talk about Romulus and Remus because I certainly am. My Roman Empire is the founding of the Roman Empire. I'm gonna take you back to before the Roman Empire was started. So Alba Longa is this great kingdom, it's really cool, it's fun. They have this leader named Numitor. Numitor has a bunch of sons and he has one daughter named Rhea Silvia, right? They're having a great time together. He also has a younger brother named Amulus. Amulus is a cool guy, he loves shopping for shiny daggers to stab the king with. Amulus kills all of Numitor's sons, except he doesn't kill Rhea Silvia, Numitor's daughter, or Numitor, but irrelevant, we'll get back to that. So Amulus is now like, what do I do with Rhea Silvia? She's just there, which is what I think most people say about me at parties. He's like, oh wait, there's this thing called the Vestal Virgins, which actually was a thing back in Rome. It was this group of priestesses who had to protect the flame of Vesta. And the thing about being a Vestal Virgin is you have to be a virgin. So that's why Amulus puts her in there, because he's like, okay, then she can't have any sons that can come and overthrow me. All's fine and dandy except for the fact that the god of war, Mars, also known as Ares in Greek mythology, looks upon her and is like, And so he goes down and essays her. Rhea Silvia really has the worst luck out of this story, just you wait. So she gets pregnant with twins. Amulus sees her and is like, you broke your Vestal priestess job. And there was this thing with the Vestal Virgins where if you did have marriage or if you did let the flame go out, you then had to be buried alive. And we do have records actually of this happening, which is very fascinating. And it's a really cool insight into Roman religion because I think it's a smaller part that we don't get to hear as much about. So Rhea has two baby boys, Romulus and Remus. Ever heard of them? Since she broke her priesthood vows, whatever, she has to get buried alive, but also that means her sons have to be prosecuted. And then on top of that, there's the fact that Romulus and Remus could take Amulus's throne because they are descendants of the true Abelongian king. So Amulus takes the boys, gives them to a servant, says, go drown them in the river. The servant takes them to the Tiber River and wants to drown them, but decides against it, and so they just float along instead. They end up docking next to a she-wolf, the Lupa. I'm sure anyone who is remotely involved in Roman mythology has heard of this, and we'll get back to the Lupa. The she-wolf takes them in, raises them as her own, and it helps them be able to survive in this wilderness. And then one day a shepherd sees them and is like, maybe a wolf isn't the best mother? Just a thought. So the shepherd, Faustulius, takes them in and raises them as his own. They become really prominent hunters and leaders within their community. They gain a lot of esteem, and eventually they run into none other than Numitor. And they are like, wait, you're our grandfather? That's so sick. We're actually princes. And they convince Numitor to go take his throne back from Amulus. Now Numitor is king again. This is why you don't just kill the king's descendants, you kill the actual king to become crowned. Not important. After Romulus and Remus have helped their grandfather reclaim the throne of Alba Longa, they decide, hey, wait, we kind of want prestige ourselves. And so they decide to go found their own city. We know where this is going. So Romulus and Remus are setting out to see the world, right? And they stumble upon the 7 hills of Rome. The 7 hills of Rome had different kings on every hill, different settlements, cultures. They all became part of Rome eventually, as did most of the Mediterranean. Romulus is looking at the hills and he thinks, hey, the Palatine Hill is kind of it. But Remus is like, I think the Aventine Hill is cooler. They get in your typical sibling squabble and Romulus kills Remus. Just like what happened when you and your sister fought over Just Dance. Coincidentally, they create a civilization on Palatine Hill. Romulus is great, he's loving his city, he names it Rome, obviously after himself, so that's where we get the name. He doesn't have that many citizens, so he decides to invite anyone from the exterior kingdoms and civilizations to say, if you are either a criminal or an exile, you can come into Rome and have citizenship. There's only one problem with that. See, I don't know how many of you guys know this, but women weren't very powerful for most of history, and obviously this was entirely a historical thing and has no precedent in our world today. So all the criminals and exiles that were coming into Rome are all men. So there's no women to continue the population, and Romulus, he decides, hey, we need a repopulation so the city can continue. And now there's the need to find women. So they have a festival and invite all the Sabine people to their city. That's where we get the famous Rape of the Sabine? I don't know how to pronounce it. That's where we get the famous Rape of the Sabine women. So the Roman people steal all the women from the Sabine people and make them their wives. They're really happy, but the Sabine people are kind of like, hey, no, those are our daughters' wives, and we kind of want them back. So they go to war with the Romans. That is fine and dandy. They're all fighting each other. Why do I keep saying fine and dandy? I don't know. As this war is going on, Romulus is sitting with his troops. He's a little nervous, and so he prays to the god of Jupiter to help protect him in this battle. He says, if you do help me, I will build a temple in your honor right in the spot that he is sitting and praying and where all of his soldiers are around him. And that's where we get the famous temple of Jupiter, and that's why it's where it is in Rome. As this war is waging, the Sabine women are like, hey, wait, we're here too, and now we've married these guys and they're our husbands, but these are our fathers and brothers. There's really no winning. So the Sabine king Titus and Romulus decide to create a treaty and make peace and become co-rulers. But seeing from Remus, we know Romulus is not always the best co-ruler. Coincidentally, Titus dies shortly afterwards. Now we don't know that it's from Romulus, but a lot of people have speculated that it is. So now Rome includes the Palatine Hill, the Roman people of exiles and criminals, and the Sabine people, because Romulus still took over the Sabine people when Titus died, and a little bit of Alba Longan culture as well because of the connection between Numitor and Romulus creates a prosperous and fabulous city that I'm living in now. Okay, so is this true? Short answer, no. Long answer, kind of. So the important thing to note here is that the Romans didn't have access to a lot of their really ancient history, especially in the later years of the empire, because when the Gauls came in, they destroyed most of Roman history. This story in particular was written in 3rd century BCE, while it's supposed to have taken place during the 8th century BCE, which means it wasn't written in the time that it existed, so it was probably just mythological reinterpretations of things that actually happened, just like we saw with the Odyssey and my video about that. Go watch it and like and subscribe. There's also the element of real archaeology where we can see that civilizations did occur in this time period on these hills. Like Palatine Hill was existing and thriving in the 8th century, so maybe Romulus did found it then. I told you we'd get back to the Lupa. So the she-wolf, she's my favorite character, icon, legend, hero of the world, but there's some debunking to do here. Basically, let's go back to the time of the Romans, right? Their language. I want to do a video on the history of the Latin language, so if anyone would be interested in that, tell me, because I don't think anyone really cares, but I do. So Lupa can be interpreted in ancient Rome as a prostitute. So maybe it was a prostitute that took them in, possibly. Also, another theory. Remember that shepherd Faustulius that I mentioned before? There was also this story about his wife being really sexually promiscuous and he didn't know, and so they would call her the Lupa, which also probably comes from the prostitute word, but also just wolves and such. So Faustulius' wife and Faustulius might have raised Romulus, but there's also the theory that Romulus was actually their son and didn't have connections to the Alba Longan king. He just became a great leader and then had connections to him. So let's start with Alba Longa in this narrative, you know, the place that Numitor was king of, that Romulus had that whole situation with. Alright, so there is evidence of the Alba Longan civilization beforehand, and their civilization started growing a lot towards the Palatine Hill. So that shows that they did have a lot of cultural interaction with whatever civilization was occurring on the Palatine Hill at this time period. And that also shows that there was a lot of integration between the two. And the Alba Longan kingdoms growing into the Palatine Hills did grow the Roman civilization quite a bit. So the Sabine people. There's a lot of evidence of early Romans having conflict with the Sabine people, and they were at war a lot. They had a lot of conflict, right? But they were eventually conquered by the Romans, and eventually, years down the line, were granted full citizenship. So the rape of the Sabine women could be interpreting that integrational element. What does this say about it? It just kind of shows how Rome became what it is, and I think that's what the myth is about anyway. So pretty cool. So why create this myth in the first place? You know, we have that one element of they didn't really have their history anymore to the same extent that we do today because of the Gauls invasion, and also because of a lot of other reasons that I will get into now. It is almost entirely about justifying their institutions. Yes, we love to see it. So first off, it sets up their leaders in 3 ways. Son of a god, son of a priestess, and descendant of a Trojan prince, and therefore Venus. That's more about the Aeneid, but basically what you need to know is Aeneas is an ancestor of Romulus and Remus, and he was a Trojan prince that when Troy was falling, he escaped because he had a prophecy and was told he would found this great empire. So he goes to Rome and starts the civilization that then Romulus and Remus continue later down the line to create the empire as we know it today. Now, why would they want to do a priestess and a god? Well, let me tell you. So with Mars, apart from this mythology in the real world and the real histories, there's a long tradition, especially in Italy, of connecting oneself with a god and saying, oh, I'm the descendant of that. Julius Caesar did it, the Medicis did it. It's basically just saying, yeah, I'm that powerful. I'm basically a demigod. It also makes him a demigod, which means he's more powerful just based on those mythology saying he's half god. You're all human. Sucks to suck. And also, Rome has very strong connections with the god Mars, and it's solidifying that connection by making their founding ruler a direct descendant of his. And the Vestal Virgin part is probably my favorite part of this, because every part of this myth is really justifying their institutions, as I said before, whereas with the Odyssey, it's a lot more of what happened to set up our civilization in the past. This is more about what directly did we do to set it up as it is now? And the Vestal Virgins, as I said, was a very prominent part of Roman culture in the real history. And so connecting Romulus with that, people would have looked at these Vestal Virgins similar to how we look at nuns, but they're a lot more prominent because there's only 7 of them and they only come from noble families. They're very, very important. If one person in our civilization said, yeah, I'm actually the son of the Pope, he's got a little power there already. Another thing I forgot to mention is while Romulus is trying to create this great city, he connects with the other kings all on the other hills and elects each one of them as members of the first Senate. So it also shows, why do we have a Senate? How did it exist? And it shows the nobility of the Senate, saying these are descendants from princes, not just your average Joe. So why do they need to do all of this through this myth? Rome is a little fledgling city. You know, we think of the Roman Empire. No, it's here. With that, they start taking over other civilizations like the Sabine people, like Alba Longa. So they need a justification for why they should be ruling over all these other civilizations. You know, like they're a small city that hasn't existed for that long. But if you want to think about it, their founder was the son of a god, the son of a priestess, a descendant of a Trojan prince. So maybe they should rule over. And now with the Trojan prince element, it's kind of hard because the Aeneid was actually written after, even though it exists for in the timeline. So we don't really know how they would have interacted with that element. It is not a true story, but there are a lot of true relations within this myth that people can disregard sometimes. It's not entirely unfactual. Romulus could have very well existed. We know his civilization was existing, so it totally could have been real. It's just been utilized as a story to show why Rome exists as it did in the days of the Empire and in the days where the story was written. And I don't really have a way to close out this story. Just don't go down the Tiber in a basket. Peace.